Hello, welcome to episode 32 of the Eyes on Privacy podcast. This month, I'm joined by Keith Watson, and I'm Preston Wiley. And this podcast, we're going to talk about Windows 10, an operating system that came out fairly recently from Microsoft and has been in the news lately, mainly for its kind of modified privacy policy and various privacy issues that people have come out against Microsoft, and we're basically going to talk about what does this mean to you? How can you essentially protect yourself? And I'll start off by saying that I am running Windows 10 on one of my desktops. So I have kind of gone through the process of dealing with the privacy settings, and I think part of the situation is Microsoft did introduce a lot of new features to Windows 10 that they, I guess, decided people wanted. And some of those features have significant privacy implications to go along with them. And one of them is they have a Cortana is their voice recognition, essentially voice assistant type situation, kind of like Siri or Google now, that Google and Apple have. And they've introduced a few other features in the operating system that could have some privacy implications, and a lot of people have complained about them. Essentially, a lot of the settings are opt out settings versus opt in settings. So, what's your opinion, Keith, of some of the new things that you've seen in Windows 10?
Well, I think this is the newer Microsoft trying to keep up with the Apples and Googles of the world. I think given Microsoft's market share in terms of like mobile devices, for example, if you leave out the Surface and look at just Windows Phone, who has a Windows Phone? I don't know anybody with a Windows Phone. I think they're trying to make a unified operating system. In fact, I know that's their strategy, to make a unified operating system from server to desktop to your handheld, to your Surface, to your tablets, all running Windows 10. And to do that and to make those devices appealing, they're taking a lot of the services and features in, say, mobile devices and making sure they're part of the desktop. So it's one OS all the way across the environment. I think that's kind of their strategy with the new CEO. Satya Nadella, I think is his name. And that seems to be their strategy. I mean, look at just on if we take their applications, for example, who would have thought that you could get Microsoft Office on Android and iPhone and iOS devices? Well, you can. I mean, they're producing it now. So I think Windows 10 is just an extension of that strategy and an attempt to really change users' opinions about their desktop operating systems. And so some of these features that they want to provide require a lot more services provided by the Microsoft cloud, if you will. All the services like Cortana, where you're asking questions, very similar to Siri, that's recorded and then sent to the Microsoft server somewhere to figure out what it is you want and how to get you that data. Or just doing a search now, your searches are going to go to Bing, and then Bing is going to do the searching for you. And so a lot of that is now integrated into Windows 10, and it kind of started that way with kind of the App Store and the applications available in Windows 8, 8.1. And this is just a further iteration on that. And I think they're really just trying to catch up with what a lot of Google and Apple have been doing for years now. And so there's going to be a privacy impact to that. And so much like you're giving up some privacy to use Google and Apple services, same thing with Microsoft. It's just part of the game if you want to use those services.
Well, and I think that that's a important point is that I think a lot of the stuff that Microsoft is doing, Apple and Google have been doing for years, like their voice, like the voice stuff that I mean, there's typing that, you know, they kind of track your typing and suggest for suggested sites and to help you autofill your stuff. There's an advertising ID in Windows 10 that can be used to present advertising because, as most of us know, Windows 10 was actually a free upgrade for users, and I think they're trying to. It started with Windows 8. They're trying to monetize. I think Windows a bit more through advertising for like the home, for the home users. So I think they're more about providing the operating system free and monetizing that a little bit, which Google does with with their services as well. So I think this. I mean, and if you look at Apple settings, a lot of these settings that people are complaining about the privacy issues of have been on like OS 10 for a while, like location stuff and things like that. So I'm not sure if this is if all of the essentially picking on Microsoft is justified, or if it's Microsoft, so we have to pick on them. You know, is that some of what? Do you think that's some of what's going on?
Well, you know, Microsoft has always been the favorite target of anybody who's disliked operating systems. There was always something you could point out in Windows that was just something you hated. So yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. But I also think you're right that it's catch-up time for Microsoft. Microsoft was, if we go back 15, 20 years ago, was the leader in technology in the personal computing space. And they're not that today. That's been taken over by Apple, by Google, and they're just trying to play catch up. I think they were market leaders for the longest time. I mean, they were actually a monopoly, and paid for that, and through a lot of some of the remedy from that whole monopoly lawsuit has kind of affected them, and they're not a monopoly anymore. They're certainly a large player, and they will continue to be a large player in the enterprise space, for example. But in the home space, not so much. And Apple, with its desktops and tablets and phones, has really eaten away at a lot of the market share, as well as other companies as well. That a market share that Microsoft really used to dominate, and they're not the dominant player anymore, and they want to be again.
I mean, well, they're still pretty dominant in the desktop market, but yeah, they've definitely slipped a bit, yeah. And I mean, I did a quick Google search before we actually, it wasn't a Google search, but it was a search on essentially this basically the voice control of operating systems, and from what I can tell is Siri is not in OS 10 yet, but is going to be soon, is for my understanding, and right. And Apple users have been wanting it in OS 10 for the last 4 years or so.
Sure.
So
they do some. They have a dictation service, which I think has been in at least the last 2 versions, and so it's not like they're completely without something. But they don't have a Siri equivalent on the OS side. That is true.
So in some senses, Microsoft kind of beat them to it with Windows 10, and maybe that was a goal, essentially, to beat Apple to the voice control type situation on desktops. And I have not really used the voice control on Windows 10. Like I said, I've been using Windows 10, and I turned it off because I don't really think I would need it on a desktop. It's nice to have part of it, it's nice to have on a phone, from a sense where you can control it when your phone is sitting, not within arm's reach, or when you're in your car and you want to, and you're sitting at a light and you want to, have it'll read my text messages to me and things like that. So on a phone, I think it's a really nice feature, but I mean, I don't know how useful it would be on my desktop. I guess if I used a desktop at, downstairs and I had it in a central room, maybe I could find being able to control my desktop from anywhere sitting in the room could be a useful feature, but that's not how I use my desktop. So,
well, I've always tried. I played with the Mac voice command system, and it's interesting. It's got some weaknesses. The only problem with any type of computer voice interface is when you go to the office, you don't want to talk to your computer because everybody else around you is going to be listening. And especially if you're in an open office environment, kind of like we are, that's not something that the people around you would really appreciate. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges. If you had your own office and you don't mind talking to your computer, then hey, yeah, go for it. But
right, I definitely don't see it being used like in an office environment. I could see more of it in like a home environment where
Absolutely.
you have your computer centrally located, like in your living room or whatever, and you could tell it to play music or send an email or whatever while you're sitting on your couch instead of having to get up and walk to the computer and actually physically type the email. I could see that as being useful. And I mean, you can kind of do it with your phone, but I mean, you can send text messages, you can kind of call people and stuff like that. But I don't think we're quite to the point where a voice control has hit that level yet, but maybe we're starting to get there. But it does have privacy implications.
Absolutely.
There is privacy implications because pretty much all voice control, the voice control software that from the Google Now to the Siri to the Cortana, it all sends your voice data to the respective companies where they process it on their servers, because the processing of voice data is expensive, and they can essentially, I don't know if what you would call it, crowdsource, or getting a lot of voice data can allow them to recognize your commands a lot easier. So they put it off to a central site. So so basically whatever you say could be sent to a company, and it's pretty much has to listen to you all the time. Now, I'm not saying it's sending that data to Microsoft or Google or Apple all the time, but it does kind of have to listen to you all the time for the whatever keyword is set up to trigger it to actually start listening to you.
Right. Yep, that is certainly a feature of Siri and Google Now, especially on the mobile devices. On the Mac, actually, the command and the dictation feature has the ability for you to download a software package. So all the translation is done locally on your computer instead of sending it to Apple. So that's one thing that is available on the Mac side.
It's also noted that Cortana is turned off by default on Windows 10. There's also, there's other features that have scared people, essentially. There's a feature for sharing your Wi-Fi password with your friends is one feature that I've seen right. Kind of was like, oh man, that means people can just get my Wi-Fi password. I think you have to turn it on first off.
Yeah, and you have to say, I want to share.
Yeah. And secondly, in a way, you could argue that it protects your Wi-Fi password because it doesn't technically share your Wi-Fi password with your friend. It just allows your friend to connect to your Wi-Fi without needing the password because it's shared via the operating system.
Yeah, you don't get to see it. It just handles it under the covers in theory.
And then they can't necessarily tell everybody that they know your password. Then so in a way it kind of protects you, but it's one of those things that is unless you know exactly how it works, it's kind of scary.
Right. And that was the big news around that, really, was like, oh no, I can use Facebook to share my Wi-Fi password. That's a terrible idea. And if you describe it that way, yeah, that's a terrible idea. But you got to understand what the purpose was and how it worked before you understood.
And then they entered in Windows 10. They introduced a new web browser, which is called Edge, and that has some new features as well that are very in common with like Chrome and things like that, where it has it has completion. It can if you when you start typing, it can try and guess what you're trying to type and things like that, and that involves sending data again to Microsoft and things like that. So there's all these new features that Microsoft is trying to introduce, and all of them have various privacy implications. But on Microsoft has pretty much allowed you to turn everything off. So if you do not want the feature, if you're worried about it, you can turn it off. There's some exceptions to that, but for the most part, you can turn everything off. I mean, like there's features for sending. If like an application crashes, you can choose the level at which it tells Microsoft what happened to your computer. And one other situation that I think is new in Windows 10, or maybe it was new in Windows 8, I can't remember, is you can't turn off updates in Windows 10, which
Right.
I think is a good thing, because you should be updating your computer.
Well, yeah, ideally.
But that's another thing that I think is people are wary of. I mean, that's not really, I wouldn't really call that necessarily a privacy issue, but it's just one of those issues that people get concerned about because they've heard bad things about bad updates and things like that. So
I think that happens less these days, but certainly it does happen. But yeah, I mean, really, to not apply updates is a worse situation than getting a bad update, I think. But that's just me.
Right, and it seems like every time Microsoft comes out with a new operating system, this stuff always, issues always arise. People always say, "Oh, look at what they're doing now," or look at the bad things or whatever. And this is essentially more of the same. But overall, I think now I didn't read the however long privacy policy that came with it, but I'm happy that I can, for the most part, turn off all the features that, like, I don't have to use location. I don't have to, have an advertising ID for more personalized advertisements. I don't have to have all of this stuff. I can turn it all off if I want to, but I can leave some of it on if I want the features that it provides. So overall, I think there's a link to a Lifehacker article that will be posted with this, which I think contains pretty much most of what you need to know about the privacy settings and pretty much how to turn all of them off or on. So, like I said, Cortana is turned off by default, so you have to actually turn that one on.
Yeah, it has some interesting tech under the hood. You mentioned updates, and one of the interesting ones is they claim in the Lifehacker article that it uses a BitTorrent-like peer-to-peer file sharing to distribute updates. So that's kind of cool. So if you had like a very small pipe to get updates, and I will point out, I think the last Patch Tuesday updates were over a gig of data that you had to download. And you had 5 computers, you don't want to download those things 5 times if you can have one machine download it and distribute it to the other machines on your network too. So that's kind of an interesting way of distributing updates. So, and they're all digitally signed too. So
yeah, that was another one. People, I remember, it's like, oh, you're loaning out your bandwidth to all the people on the internet, essentially, and that's yet another thing you can turn off and keep it. You can say, well, I want like BitTorrent. If you're familiar with BitTorrent, essentially when you're downloading, you're also uploading as well. So you're essentially sharing your bandwidth with other people. So you download and upload, and I believe this would probably be the same thing. As you're downloading the update, you're also kind of sharing it with other users on the internet, but you can turn that off. So you can download it to one computer, and then other computers on your local network can essentially download it locally, right, instead of having to use your internet connection to download it.
Right.
And that sounds like a nice feature. I mean, that you could say, well, if you have 5 computers, you're using a fifth of the bandwidth that you would if you from before you could do this. So I think that's nice.
Right.
But it does have some I guess issues with, if you're on if you have a limited limited connection or whatever, you probably want to turn that feature off, definitely.
Yep, I think going back to more of what information does Microsoft have about us, obviously with Windows 10, it's going to have a lot more. Some of it may be anonymized and so not easily traceable back to the original user. But one interesting thing to point out is that Microsoft is engaged in a legal battle, if you will, to try to prevent sharing data with federal authorities because the data resides in a European data center. It's actually their Ireland data center. And they're claiming that because the data exists over there in Ireland, that it's not accessible to U.S. authorities the same way it would be if it were in a U.S. data center. So I think they're doing that for a couple of reasons. One is due to Snowden and revelations about the intelligence agencies and what they've been up to. Just like Google and other online companies, Apple included, they're putting up a big fight with the U.S. government because they do have a lot of data, and the government wants to get a hold of it a little easier, and they're losing customers because of it, and they don't want to lose those customers. So I think there's kind of a balancing act that they're trying to do. One, they're trying to get more customers by offering new features that may rival Apple and Google and others. But at the same time, they're also putting up a legal fight to say, well, we're going to have all this data, but we're going to make sure that we don't have to give it over to the government as well. And so I think that's kind of an interesting, if you will, a privacy battle. And of all companies, Microsoft's fighting it. So I don't know what to think of this yet. And my mind is not fully wrapped around what this means in terms of privacy overall, especially with the features. Some of them are, a little concerning. And then the amount of data that they're going to collect. So I don't know. It's kind of a yay, maybe. I'm not sure.
Well, I find a lot of these, as far as concerning, yeah. But I mean, when you have a smartphone,
yeah, absolutely.
They're probably worse. There were. I mean, they go with you everywhere you go. Absolutely. So I mean, your PC, I guess unless it's a laptop, but even then, you usually turn it at least to a mostly off state when you're traveling with it. With your phone, it knows where you've been all the time.
Correct.
And a lot of that data gets sent if you don't turn your location stuff off, which generally people don't, because they like to use it for the features like mapping and stuff like that. I always turn it off when I'm not using it. So it's this amount of data that Google gets from you or Apple gets from you, I think is even more scary than what Microsoft could get from you from a PC. Now, if you have a Windows phone, I guess the same thing applies, but sure. But I don't think it's any worse than what Google or Apple are getting from you. So that's not necessarily a good thing.
No, certainly. But neither are good situations. But a lot of people expect different things from their desktop operating system, and that's right. Changing now. And I think that's the big pushback, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't. Why should my desktop have all these features that may make sense on a mobile environment, but not on a desktop environment? And and Apple's kind of moving a lot of their stuff from their iOS side onto the Mac OS side. And so it's not an uncommon thing to do. and it's a two-way street, right? So some of those features from the desktop go to the mobile platform, some from the mobile come back to the desktop, and it's finding the right balance for that. Certainly, if you don't like what's going on in Mac or Microsoft, well, there's always a Linux desktop, and that's what I use at work. So I'm all for that.
Well, I it's kind of odd, but lately in the last, well, it's been quite a while. I think Microsoft is definitely more open to the free use of their operating system than Apple is. At least that's my opinion. I mean, you can opt out.
What do you mean by their free use of?
You can. I mean, you can opt out of almost everything that Microsoft wants you to do, and it's hard. It's hard to opt out of some of the things Apple wants you to do, like if you don't want to create a Microsoft account on your Windows 10 computer, you don't have to create a Microsoft on your Windows 10 computer. Right. You can use it locally. With Apple, you pretty much have to have an Apple ID. You have to be connected with Apple. They have to know some things about you to just use an Apple product. And I think I find Apple's privacy stance a little bit more concerning than Microsoft's in a lot of ways because of that.
But I believe you can get around the Apple ID thing. And unless you're buying apps on the App Store or music, you don't need that to download updates. So I don't see it as a big concern.
Well,
yeah, it certainly is.
Actually, at the
install time, I think
it takes a lot to get around it. But I mean, it may be possible to get around it, but it takes a lot.
You can also create a temporary account and then just never use it again either.
Yeah, well, that's true. That is true. But it takes work to get around. Where with Microsoft, it's like if you do you not want to do this? Oh, okay, here's a button. You don't have to do it. With Apple, you have to work to get around their situation. So anyway, that's and I guess Google is I don't even know if you can get out of creating a Google account. I haven't tried. So.
Well, if you want to use Google stuff, you kind of have to have that Google account to do it. So.
Yeah, pretty much. So anyway, I mean, I guess summing the whole thing up, I don't think I don't think a lot of the stuff that is within Windows 10 is any more concerning than what Google and Apple are doing. I mean, they're trying. Windows or Microsoft is trying to essentially add those features that you're used to on your smartphone, or your Apple. So they're trying to keep up essentially, not stay behind. So that's what most of these features are. They have a new web browser. They have a new voice system. They're even adding some new features that you don't see, like the ability to essentially share your Wi-Fi password with friends that are also running Windows 10.
Right.
So I think, and you can opt out of pretty much any setting that you wish to opt out of. So I would take a look at the article that's going to be posted with this podcast and set your settings accordingly for how you want your privacy to be impacted by Windows 10 and what features you want to use. If you're not going to use a feature, turn it off. Yep. If you want a feature, leave it on. So, and be aware of what data is getting sent to Microsoft. Be aware of what data they're keeping on you, and just be diligent. So,
absolutely.
Any final words?
No, I think you've summed it up pretty well.
All right. Well, thank you, Keith Watson. I'm Preston Wiley, and keep your eyes on privacy.